Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners, traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Now, I'm going to start this webinar off by a little bit of an interactive element because I'd like to learn a little bit about you before we start. So I'm going to ask you two questions today. So you're going to have to open up the Zoom chat panel, and despite the fact of being in COVID lockdowns, I still fumble around for the chat control. So open up the chat window. I'm going to ask you two questions this morning. So the first question is, I want you to tell me in the chat, if you weren't working today, what leisure activity would you be doing? Would you be playing golf? Would you be going for a swim? Would you be playing some video games? So I'm going to count you in. 3, 2, 1, go. Now, I'm getting a few in there. I'm getting a bit of golf, getting a little bit of beach reading, relaxing, CrossFit. Love it. There's so much great stuff in here. Crafting. Awesome. Mountain biking. All right. So that was your warm-up. Now, my second question for you, and this one's really important. I'm going to count you in for this one. I want you to tell me, what did you earn last financial year? Okay, this should be fun. Ready? 3. No, I'm not going to make you do it. I'm not going to make you do it. But what I'm hoping is that when I asked you that question about sharing something about yourself, you had a little feeling inside of your chest. And that sensation is the one, when I said not enough, good. There's a sensation of when you're about to share something about yourself and you're putting the trust in the person or the organization that you're sharing information with, that they'll treat that respectfully, they'll do the right thing with your information and keep it safe. 2022, Deloitte ran a survey in Australia, and what they found from that survey was that in regards to categories of companies that they would trust with their personal information, real estate as a category was the lowest ranked out of all categories in Australia. My name's Drew Pearse. I'm Executive Manager here at REA Group. I've had the pleasure of working at REA for 14 years. I've been 18 years in digital, and I'm also the chair of our privacy leadership team at REA. So I want to talk to you today about privacy, because it's my opinion that privacy will be one of the defining topics of the next decade, and every Australian consumer is going to hold all of us to a much higher standard than they have in the past. Now, this can be a little bit of a complex topic, so I wanted to start off with some basics. So I'm sure there are some fancy definitions about privacy, but I like to use these words. You get to choose what remains unknown. So you, as an individual, have the power, the ability to know and to affect what is communicated with you out in the world. So your beliefs, who you do business with, your health information, these are all things that you get to have that control over. And this isn't something that is a luxury. I think it's something that we would all aspire to have, is the things that are kind of deep and personal to us, that we can hold on to those and we know where they're going to be shared. The traditional view of privacy is kind of this one. What happens in my backyard, that's my business. I keep that's all kept to myself. And if I choose to wear my short European bathers in my backyard, that's my choice. Sorry to leave you with that mental image. But privacy has become more complex. As technology has evolved, there's all these different types of data that can exist about you. So there's behavioral data, which is things that you're pointing and clicking on. Location data, so in your pocket, you've got your phone, which is radiating information about your location, where you go to work, where your kids go to school, and in your ID documents. So if you're working with the government service, you may need to provide copies of your ID documents. And it's also becoming more complex as technology changes. So if we look at a couple of emerging spaces, we look at things such as gaze. So the ability for eye tracking to understand what you're looking at. So your eyes can really tell information about what you're most interested in. And for those that have been following along the technology world, Apple announced their Vision Pro. And one of the things that's unique about that is it has cameras that downfire, and it can track the movement of your limbs. And what they've actually worked out is that through the motion of your body, they can work out what your age is, if you have a disability or any medical conditions. So as you can see, as technology evolves, we have to update our thinking as well. Now, there are a couple of concepts that we tend to kind of smoosh together a little bit. I just want to kind of tease them apart. So there's this idea of security, and this is about keeping things safe. So you can operate your business and have security and have that as a very important need. So your things like your financial records, your customer information, those are things that you want to keep safe no matter what. Then there's the world of privacy, which is really about personal information. So things that you're collecting and then what you do with it. And we often only start to think about the privacy aspects when something goes wrong. And it's the intersection of these two areas where things can go wrong. So the ability for your organization to keep the information, personal information that you collected, safe and out of the hands of someone that might want to do something bad with it. You may have been to a presentation in your career where someone has told you that data is gold. I've definitely been to them, and I can't argue it. My teams here at REA look after AI, we look after personalization, we have a variety of data that we use to turn into value for our users. But I want to offer a slight riff on that if I can. What if you weren't to think about it as gold, but you were to think about it as uranium? What an amazingly powerful element that can power nuclear reactors. But if you're not respectful and you don't treat that with care, then you have a disaster. And so I guess an example of that would be information that you have collected from someone who's applying for a rental property, and keeping the information to people that weren't successful is data that you no longer need, but could cause a problem for you later if it's not treated with care. So it raises the question, why wouldn't you want to share things about yourself? So you have to believe that information about you can change and affect your experience in life. So for example, you may share your financial position, but a business decides that you're a top earner, so they don't give you a discount offer. Or for example, you might apply to be a coach of a sporting team, but they don't agree with your sexual preferences and deny you the opportunity. Or it could be that you have a medical condition and an employer decides that they're not going to give you an extra opportunity because they don't think that you'll be able to commit to it with your medical disorder. And there are these other categories of information that the government calls sensitive information. So this information in the wrong hands can change things for you. A group called Reset Australia put out a report in 2023, and it talks about the world of data brokering. And it's a sobering read. In there, it talks about the fact that an individual Australian could have at least 650,000 data points about them available for targeting. Now, I want you to think about someone that you're close to or someone in your community who's doing it tough. Someone who may be in financial trouble or they are on the verge of a difficult financial situation. If you've got that person in your mind, I want to kind of talk to you about this next piece. So in that same report, you can purchase data segments about Australians experiencing financial stress. Now, what do you think we do for these people in Australia in the middle of a cost of living crisis? We target them with payday lenders, high-risk financial products, and online gambling. So I want you to go back to that person in your mind who is struggling or on the verge of entering a difficult financial situation and picture them on their computer. And I want you to picture them with ads popping up in front of them for high-risk financial products. And this doesn't make me feel great personally. And I think there's a better that we can do in Australia for people who are doing it tough. Many years ago, I had what I'd call a privacy awakening. And this was a moment where I received an email. And on that email, it told me that my data had been stolen. And some of you may have experienced that in the past. That moment was a little bit different for me because I looked at that email and I couldn't recall the name of the business. And so after a little bit of research in my Gmail, I worked it out. 15 years ago, I had applied for a job. Now, that job, it wasn't the organization that I applied to who had had their data stolen. They'd actually given my data to a recruitment agency, and their data had been stolen. And it made me ponder a couple of things. So one, the information that I've put into a form about myself 15 years ago is very different to who I am now. But also, what had they been doing with my data for 15 years? And I believe that many Australians have had a privacy awakening in the last few years. I just want to give you a very quick timeline of privacy history in Australia, just so we can kind of catch you up quickly. In 1988, Crocodile Dundee 2 was the #1 movie in the world, but we also got the Australian Privacy Act. I think this is important because if we put that in context of 1991, this is when we had the first website. And I often think to myself, how could they have known? How could they have known the sorts of businesses, the sorts of experiences that a modern person would find in Australia? How could they cater for all those different circumstances? If you fast forward to the 2000s, we've started to move from an internet where you just consumed information to one that you interacted with. And Facebook was one of the standout moments in the internet where you could now start to publish information. So you could contribute and you could connect with other individuals. And then the iPhone in 2007 really brought this capability of sharing data about yourself wherever you were. And it's a little information radiator that you have all the time. Things started to get interesting in the 2010s. So there was a thing called the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And for those of you that aren't aware of that, there's a great documentary on Netflix called The Great Hack, and it talks about this in detail. But what happened was that another business obtained data from Facebook, and they were able to manipulate that data to affect the outcome of a US election. Off the back of that, in Australia, we had a thing called the ACCC Digital Platforms Inquiry, which was looking into the power of digital platforms in Australia. There were a couple of things that came out of that. One of those was around that major players should pay for content. And you may recall that many years later, there was an instance where Facebook blocked news content in Australia briefly. That was kind of off the back of this. But it also found in there that the Australian Privacy Act was no longer fit for purpose and it needed to be updated. And then later on, we had the thing called Australian Privacy Principles, which was a reworking, but it wasn't a wholesale rewrite of privacy law. And you move into the last few years, the real estate industry itself has not been immune from scrutiny. So we've had issues with data breaches, and we've had different organizations make representations around what they think we should do with personal information and where it should go. And off the back of Optus and Medibank, there were changes to the fines. So right now, as an organization, in the event that you were fined, it could be $50 million or 30% of turnover in that period, whichever is higher. And that's up from previously it was $2 million. So this is something that the government is taking very seriously, and they have foreshadowed that Privacy Act reform is on the way. Now, last year, there were a couple of key developments. In February, we had a review of the Privacy Act, 320 pages, so you need to fire up the espresso machine to read that one. But if you want to shortcut that, there's also the government response that came out in September, and it talks about the government's position on those proposed changes. And what we know from that is the majority of those recommendations were either agreed or agreed in principle, and some of them were shelved. Now, I like to think about this in this way. Imagine you're driving down the road and there's trying to merge into fast-moving traffic. Now, that car is your business, and the fast-moving traffic is the rest of the world and the way they deal with privacy. And Australia is in a very different position to many other countries in the world where we haven't updated our privacy law in a long time. So you'll be merging into that fast-moving traffic while trying to keep your eye on the lane that you're in with your business at the same time. And I've heard all of the reasons why you should never do anything about privacy. Now, this is an opportunity for you to get your pen and paper out, because I can help you out with some objection handling. So this is one you might hear, is the do nothing approach. And you often hear people say, well, privacy is only something that big companies need to worry about. Well, the fact there is the recommendation is to level the playing field between all Australian companies. Another one you might hear is the wait and see approach. Everyone will be in the same boat, so I have time. Well, the fact is many Australian businesses trade overseas already, and they comply with international law. And we don't regularly say that our businesses are exactly the same as our competitors. We all have very different and nuanced business operations. And then the last one I hear is kind of a fingers crossed approach. Oh, it's going to get pushed back again. Well, yes, it was pushed back when we experienced the pandemic, but we're in a different Australia now. And 89% of Australians want the government to provide more legislation in this area. So the will of Australian consumers is for change to happen, and I feel confident that it will. And even if you don't buy into any of that, it's my view that Australian consumers are turning their back on businesses right now. This is the Deloitte report that I spoke about from 2022, and they did a new version of it in 2023. Now, interestingly, when the government surveyed Australian consumers, they found out that 3 out of 4 Australians had experienced harm from a data breach. Now, harm is quite a technical legal word, but it means something bad. They experienced something bad. They had a negative experience. But if we dig into this Deloitte report, it says that 35% of consumers haven't bought a product because they weren't comfortable sharing their personal information. And then 45%, so that's 1 in 2 of under 35s have proactively left the provider after a data breach. And for older Australians, so 55 plus, they're a little bit more forgiving. However, they said that if you had a data breach twice, only 5% would be prepared to forgive the organisation. So you think about the years of effort put into cultivating a client base that could be impacted by not taking care of personal information properly. And if we dig deeper into that report, there was that stat that I mentioned at the start where real estate was the lowest ranked. Well, in mixed news, in 2023, real estate went up 1. And what do we think it was that we managed to rise up the rankings in 2023? What was the innovation? Well, actually, we weren't Optus. So telecommunication and media went right to the bottom and real estate moved up 1 slot. Now, when Roy Morgan surveyed about trusted and distrusted Australian brands, Optus was the least trusted brand in Australia 12 months after they suffered a data breach. So the impact to your brand won't be forgotten instantly. It will linger, and I look forward to seeing what those Roy Morgan survey results look like in the future. And from an REA perspective, this is something that we've been thinking about for quite a long time. Inquiries on a listing are an enormously powerful indication of intent, and we think that will continue into the future. However, if we've got a large group of people in Australia that have had negative experience with their data and real estate is not a trusted industry, then my hypothesis is that sometimes when people go to hit the inquiry button, they're thinking, no, I might not do that. So what we want to do is create as many opportunities for someone to interact and share their interest with a listing in many ways as possible, whether it's saving or booking an inspection. All those different signals tell us whether someone is interested. And I just want to channel my dad for a moment. My dad would say to me, what about those young whippersnappers and their TikToks? They don't care about privacy. They're just giving it away. They're on there day and night sharing their individual information. Now, as the parent of a teenager, look, I'm not always confident that my son knows what he's wearing in a given day, but look, I'm going to go with this. I'm going to say that if he uses TikTok and he read the privacy policy and he was cool with it, then I'm going to say he's getting pretty good value. He's being educated, he's being entertained in exchange for the information he's sharing about himself. And I think there's an important thing in there around value where people are prepared to share information about themselves when there is equivalent value returned to them. So this is how I see the world. There's a very simple privacy equation. That is transparency plus control equals trust in the privacy era. Trust is a really broad topic. And I'm not saying that privacy is everything, because when it comes to trust, there are many factors that roll up into that. But what I am saying is that technology comes along and it changes the game and it changes the dimensions by how trust is measured. So if you think about online reviews is a way that someone can come along and make their own determination about the level of service that a business provides. Or they go and look at Instagram and they get a feel for whether they have a personal connection with a brand. And so technology plays an important role. And I believe that privacy will be one of those dimensions that businesses will be measured on. So let's dive into this a little bit. So first of all, let's talk about transparency. Say what you do, then do what you say. That's quite a sort of simple philosophy to live by. However, that's not always the case. So if we look at this survey from NordVPN, and it looks into the reading time of privacy policies of websites that people visit in a month, plus their possible earnings, it says that in Australia, to read the privacy policies would take you 46 hours per month. Now, that doesn't feel transparent to me. Like if you had to invest that amount of time to truly understand what was happening with your data, and given the amount of time that you could be using that time to go and earn income, you're probably not going to make that choice. Conversely, there's a company that we work with called Catch, who are experts in privacy. And when privacy is done right, they actually see a positive impact on the relationship with the company. But on the right-hand side, that 49%, so 1 in 2, would trust the company more when they're clear about and transparent about their privacy practices. I just want to share a few examples with you here for a moment. On the left-hand side, this is the Privacy Center for realestate.com.au. So we made some changes last year. And now this is not a technical innovation, but I think it's a positive step forward. So we took our existing privacy policy and it was at an academic reading level. We rewrote that so that it was at Harry Potter reading level, so that more Australians could clearly understand our approach to privacy. In the middle is Discord, which is a gaming service. They take it one step further. They start to tell the story about how they make money from data. And if you look there, it says, you're not the product. So what they're saying is, this is something that we won't do. We won't make money from your data. And we will often refer to this as a privacy promise, what you will do and what you will never do. Now, on the right-hand side, I've left this blank. What's the sort of value that I will say yes to every single time? So I think this is an enormous opportunity in the real estate world, where what is the thing that I will say yes to, that amazing value that is something that I'm prepared to say yes every single time. Now, I want to share this video with you for a moment, and this is from The Guardian in the UK.
Why your data matters to us. Our owner, the Scott Trust, exists to secure the financial and editorial independence of The Guardian. Other than to cover expense, the Scott Trust takes no dividend from the business, ensuring all the profits are reinvested back into The Guardian and its award-winning journalism. One of the ways we generate revenue to safeguard our journalism for the future is by using your data. For example, when you sign into The Guardian's websites, or use cookies when you browse, to make advertising more relevant to you. This enables us to charge advertisers money, which helps us keep the website open to all, while at the same time making The Guardian and Observer's own products and services more tailored to you. We have guidelines on our website which clearly explain how you can stay in control of the data you provide to us, as well as a place where you can manage your preferences, and a team who are dedicated to keeping any data you choose to share safe and secure. To create or manage your account, visit theguardian.com/your-account.
Now, I don't think that everyone needs to make a video, and not everyone will have the resources to do that. But this is an example of where an organization is making a privacy promise. And so one of the things that you can think about is within your organization, if an employee was asked, what will you do with our data, or what will you never do? How would you answer that question? And then if you can answer that question, you can take it one step further and provide them with a link to what your position on privacy is. And it's a very tangible step towards being more transparent about your data practices. Okay, now I'll move on to the second topic and the second part of that privacy equation, which is around control. Now, at realestate.com.au, our users are very vocal and they love telling us about what they like and what they don't like. And I want to share a couple of comments that have been shared with us from our users. And a little bit confronting, but I think it's worth sharing in the context of control. So it says, I don't contact the agent unless I need the information. Once you get on a database, you can almost never get off it. Or they put me into their newsletters and marketing by default. I'm giving you the details not to bloody get bombarded with your marketing emails. Now, we're out to see a change in how we manage communications and what we call consent in Australia. So on the left-hand side is what I would describe as the old thinking. It's the all or nothing approach. So when you come to interact with a business or a service, you can't come in here unless you agree to all of the things that are in our terms and conditions or within our privacy policy. Now, how that is going to change is that the new thinking is that every consumer will be presented with choices. And those choices will be about the things that they wouldn't expect would happen when interacting with a service. And all of those settings may need to be turned off by default and the user opt into those. And then everything else that you would reasonably expect from a business can be in your terms and conditions or in your privacy policy, because there are going to be the nitty-gritty of running a business, which is not relevant. But it's surfacing to users the things that they may not expect will happen with their data and giving them the control over what happens. Now, the proposal is to take that one step further in Australia and introduce a thing called the fair and reasonable test. And the best way to think about that is it's something that sits above the individual choices that you're giving to a user. And what that means is you can ask the question and someone can say, yes, but was it fair and reasonable that you asked the question to start with? And so this is going to make the area of capturing choices, capturing consent from users much more nuanced and will change the landscape in Australia in the future. Just to bring this to life for you, I just want to give you a few examples here. On the left-hand side, an example of where consent is collected is when on realestate.com.au, we collect an inquiry. And this is an area that we're thinking deeply about and how this might change in the future. In the middle, this is an example from LinkedIn. So in LinkedIn, you can go and access your data and download it. Providing the ability for someone to see everything that you've collected about them provides that sense of control. But taking it one step further, if I go on the right-hand side here, here's an example of Uber, where you can delete your data. So if I no longer want to be on the database of an organization, within one click, I can request for that information to be deleted. So I want to talk a little bit about what now, and then we're going to wrap up shortly. So change is coming. So what I touched on before is you can start those steps towards preparing for where privacy is going in Australia by educating yourself about those changes and starting that conversation around things like transparency and control and how they can come into your business. And I think one thing you can do is start talking to the other businesses that you rely on and see if they have answers to your questions. And if they don't, then ask a few more questions. And I think that will be a very important dialogue between yourself and the other organizations that you rely on. And with this change in Australia, REA will need to change. I guess the second point here is Australian real estate businesses will need to change as well. So starting that conversation about transparency and control within your organization is a great place to start, and a great place to start thinking about your position on privacy and the things that you will do and the things that you will never do. I'd like to just leave you with this thought now. If we go back to the original thought that I gave you around driving down the freeway with this fast-moving traffic that you've got to merge into, do you want to be in the driver's seat for that change or be in the passenger seat? I think there is an enormous opportunity within Australia for the real estate sector to really shine the light on the way, to really be an awesome example of how Australian consumers and their privacy can be managed. And I really look forward to working with the industry to make this happen. So thanks very much for joining the webinar today. We do have time for some Q&A, so I'll look to my other screen here in a moment to see if we've got any questions that are coming in. While you're thinking about your questions, this QR code here will take you to my LinkedIn profile. You're very welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn and stay across developments in privacy. Or if you have feedback, positive or negative, about the webinar today, I'm more than happy to hear it. Anything that we can do and collaborate together as an industry is something that I'm all ears to. So let me have a look over at the questions. So we have one question so far. So if anyone else has got questions, feel free to pop them in. So the question is cookies relevant? If so, what are they? So cookies are another technology that is in use in the internet. Now, for any people that are engineers or technologists, I probably won't give a great description here, but I'll give it a go. You imagine a cookie is the piece of information which is stored on your computer by a website. Now, where cookies have come into sharp focus in recent years is that they are the technology that is relied on to follow you around the internet. So by these little pieces of information being stored on your computer, it allows advertisers to target you when you go to another website. So if you were, for example, looking at buying a pair of shoes, and then you went to another website and then suddenly you started seeing an ad for those same shoes, then cookies is the technology underneath that, which is allowing that to happen. So there's been a number of changes in the technology landscape that have impacted cookies. So Apple was the first mover here. And so they have removed the ability for cookies, that tracking to occur on the internet. And Google is making similar changes with Chrome. They were due to make that this year, but that has been pushed back again. So yeah, cookies is very relevant to this. And that's something if you're working with another provider around advertising, they'll be able to give you some guidance on. One of the things that we've done, one of our products that we have is Audience Maximizer, and we've recently upgraded that so that it will perform better in the future, even when cookies go away. So hopefully that answered the question, but more than happy to follow up on that in the future. So the second one here I've got is, how would you know that your data has been breached? And is it possible that data is breached on an ongoing basis without noticing? Well, I think this is really a question that you would want to talk to your technology providers about. Now, ideally, what you want to have is enough tracking and measurement in place to understand whether there's been access to your systems or if anything has occurred. That's also something that we can individually provide advice on, but I would definitely talk to your technology providers around what are the different steps that you can put in place to have that knowledge. Now, I'll just look across to my screen. I'm not seeing any more questions. Ooh, no more questions. So I'm getting the thumbs up that we're okay to finish up for today. So again, thanks very much for joining the webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it and look forward to connecting with you on LinkedIn. Enjoy the rest of your day.